World leaders were horrified. Ibrahim Traore suddenly stopped while speaking at the UN General Assembly podium. He pulled a small vial from his pocket and asked, "Do you recognize this blood? This is the blood of a 9-year-old Burkina Faso girl massacred by French soldiers." The hall froze. Then projectors turned on, and massacre footage began playing on the wall. The French delegation tried to leave the hall, but Traore shouted, "The doors are locked. Everyone will watch for 14 minutes." When the footage ended, leaders of 7 countries stood up demanding sanctions against France, and history changed that day. The United Nations General Assembly Hall buzzed with the usual diplomatic murmurs. World leaders checked their phones, ambassadors whispered to aides, journalists scanned the room for noteworthy interactions. It was September 23rd, the 3rd day of the general debate, typically when attention starts to wane as lesser-known countries take their turn at the podium. When Ibrahim Traore, the young military leader of Burkina Faso, was announced as the next speaker, few paid close attention. Western diplomats expected another predictable speech about climate change, development goals, or perhaps vague criticisms of neo-colonialism, the standard fare from African leaders at the UN. Traore approached the podium with military precision. At 35, he was among the youngest heads of state present. His simple military uniform stood in stark contrast to the expensive suit surrounding him. No elaborate entourage followed him. No stack of papers accompanied him. Just a man, alone, carrying what appeared to be nothing more than a small leather case. "Distinguished delegates, Mr. Secretary General," he began, his voice steady and measured. "I come before you today not with prepared remarks on global cooperation, not with diplomatic platitudes, not with carefully crafted statements designed to offend no one." The hall quieted slightly as the unexpected opening caught some attention. "I come instead with truth, raw, unedited, uncomfortable truth." He paused, scanning the room slowly. His gaze lingered momentarily on the French delegation, where the foreign minister was engrossed in conversation with an aide. "For decades we have gathered in this hall to speak of peace while wars rage. We speak of human rights while atrocities continue. We speak of sovereignty while some nations still treat others as their personal resource reservoirs." The standard opening was familiar enough that many delegates continued their side conversations, checking emails or reviewing documents for upcoming sessions. "Today I break with diplomatic tradition," Traore continued, his voice gaining intensity. "Today, I will not speak about atrocities. I will show them." That statement caught more attention. Several heads looked up from their devices. Before I proceed, I ask a simple question to the French delegation. The French Foreign Minister, Jean-Baptiste Moreau, finally glanced toward the podium, irritation flickering across his face at being directly addressed. Traore reached into his pocket and pulled out a small crystal vial containing a dark red liquid. He held it up, the chamber's lights catching it dramatically. "Do you recognize this blood?" Complete silence fell over the hall. Security personnel along the walls straightened, suddenly alert. "This is the blood of Fatima Ouedraogo," Traore said, his voice now carrying through the stunned silence. "A 9-year-old girl from the village of Barcelogo in northern Burkina Faso. Fatima wanted to be a doctor. She loved mathematics. She had a pet goat named Petit Pierre." The French delegation was now fully attentive, their faces a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Fatima's blood was spilled on May 17th of this year, along with the blood of 57 other civilians, when French special forces conducted what they called an anti-terrorist operation in our sovereign territory, an operation my government never authorized. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The French foreign minister leaned forward, whispering urgently to his team. "For 3 months, France has denied any involvement in this incident. They blamed unknown militant groups. They questioned our government's investigation. They called our evidence fabricated. Today, that lie ends. Traore nodded to someone off stage. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber dimmed, and the massive screens behind the General Assembly podium, normally displaying only the UN logo, flickered to life. What you are about to see was captured by a surveillance drone operated by our military. I warn you, these images are disturbing. They are graphic. They are real. Before anyone could object or diplomatic protocols could be invoked, footage began playing on the enormous screens. The high-definition video showed a rural village at dawn. French military vehicles, clearly marked with French insignia, surrounded a cluster of modest homes. Soldiers in French uniforms methodically moved through the village. Initially, it appeared to be a standard operation. Then, without warning or apparent provocation, gunfire erupted. The drone footage, captured from above, showed villagers, many in night clothes, clearly unarmed, being cut down as they fled their homes. Horror spread across the faces of diplomats as the massacre unfolded before them. The footage was unstoppable in its brutal clarity. French soldiers systematically killing civilians, including women and children. One sequence clearly showed a small girl in a yellow dress, presumably Fatima, being shot as she ran toward a nearby field. The French delegation erupted in protest. Foreign Minister Moreau stood, shouting, "This is manufactured propaganda. We demand this unauthorized presentation be stopped immediately." Several French diplomats began gathering their materials, preparing to walk out and protest. Traore's voice cut through the commotion, steel in every word. "The doors are locked." Security personnel, not UN security, but members of Traore's own protection detail who had been strategically positioned before his speech, moved to block the exits. It was an unprecedented breach of diplomatic protocol. "Everyone will watch for exactly 14 minutes, Traore declared. 14 minutes, the precise duration of the massacre that France has denied for 3 months. Chaos threatened to erupt. The Secretary General rose from his seat, signaling frantically to UN security. American and British diplomats were on their phones. The Chinese delegation watched with calculating interest. Several African representatives sat stunned, tears streaming down their faces as the footage continued. But the doors remained blocked, and the footage played on relentlessly. The drone camera zoomed in on a French officer calmly giving orders as the killing continued. It captured soldiers photographing bodies. Most damning of all, it showed troops collecting shell casings and other evidence before departing. A clear attempt to cover up the operation. For 14 excruciating minutes, the world's most powerful gathering of diplomats was forced to witness raw atrocity without diplomatic filters or media interpretation. The timestamp on the footage counted down, second by second, life by life. When it finally ended, the screens went dark, and the chamber lights slowly rose. The silence that followed was unlike anything veteran UN observers had ever experienced. A silence heavy with shock, shame, and the weight of undeniable truth. Traore returned to the podium, his face solemn but composed. What you have just witnessed is not an isolated incident. We have documented 17 similar operations on Burkinabe soil in the past year alone, all conducted without our government's knowledge or consent, all officially denied by France. He opened the small leather case he had brought with him and removed a stack of flash drives. These contain the complete unedited footage you have just seen, along with documentation of 16 other massacres, including satellite imagery, autopsy reports, ballistics analysis, and testimonies from survivors. As I speak, this evidence is being uploaded to a secure server and distributed to every diplomatic mission and major news organization worldwide. The French foreign minister, his face ashen, was now engaged in frantic communication with Paris. Aides huddled around him, passing phones back and forth as they attempted damage control. France maintains a military presence in our region under the pretense of fighting terrorism, Traore continued. Yet the operations you have just witnessed targeted not terrorists, but villages that happen to be located in areas rich with gold, uranium, and rare earth minerals. Resources that French corporations have been trying to secure access to since our government began renegotiating contracts last year. The implications were devastating, that French military forces were being used as corporate enforcers, eliminating civilian populations that stood in the way of resource exploitation. We did not want to believe this was possible, Traore said, his voice now heavy with emotion. That in the 21st century, a permanent member of the UN Security Council would conduct secret massacres to secure economic interests. We investigated for months, seeking any alternative explanation. We found none. He looked directly at the French delegation. The blood of Fatima Ouedraogo and thousands like her cries out for justice. Today, before the nations of the world, Burkina Faso formally charges the government of France with crimes against humanity, violations of sovereignty, and economic terrorism. The diplomatic bombshell landed with seismic force. Nothing in UN protocol had prepared the body for this moment. A small nation, not only accusing a global power of atrocities, but providing undeniable evidence in real time before the entire assembly. What happened next would reshape international relations for decades to come. The president of Mali was the first to rise from his seat, his voice ringing through the chamber. Mali stands with Burkina Faso. We demand an immediate UN investigation and sanctions against France until justice is served. The Nigerian delegation stood next, then Guinea, then Togo. Within minutes, representatives from 7 African nations were on their feet, many abandoning prepared statements to express solidarity with Burkina Faso and demand immediate action. More surprising was the reaction from non-African states. Brazil's representative called for an emergency Security Council meeting. Indonesia demanded international investigators be granted unrestricted access to the sites of alleged massacres. Even traditional French allies were careful to avoid appearing to dismiss the evidence, with Canada's ambassador calling the footage deeply disturbing and requiring thorough investigation. Only the French delegation remained in disarray, caught between walking out in protest and staying to counter the accusations. The diplomatic playbook had no chapter for responding to such direct, public, and seemingly irrefutable evidence of atrocity. Foreign Minister Moreau finally approached a microphone, his usual diplomatic polish shattered. France categorically rejects these manipulated images and this unprecedented violation of General Assembly protocols. We reserve the right to respond to these slanderous accusations through appropriate channels. His words rang hollow against the raw power of what the world had just witnessed. As he spoke, phones throughout the chamber buzzed and lit up. The footage was already spreading across global media platforms, accompanied by the documentation Traore had promised. Within hours, protests would erupt outside French embassies on 6 continents. Within days, French corporations would lose billions in market value as investors fled. Within weeks, a special UN investigative commission would be established with unprecedented authority. But in that moment, in the General Assembly Hall, Ibrahim Traore delivered his final statement words that would be quoted in history books for generations. Today, we have broken the silence that enables atrocity. We have shattered the diplomatic veil that has too often protected powerful nations from accountability. From this day forward, let it be known that no nation, regardless of its economic might or military power, can spill innocent blood with impunity. The eyes of the world are open now, and they will not close again. As he stepped away from the podium, the dam broke. Delegates from dozens of nations swarmed around him, some offering protection, others expressing solidarity, many simply wanting to be associated with what they recognized as a historic turning point. The aftermath unfolded with unprecedented speed in international relations. By nightfall, the hashtag #14minutes was trending globally. Major news networks ran the footage, though many edited the most graphic sections. Military analysts confirmed the authenticity of the French uniforms and equipment. Satellite data corroborated the time and location. Former French soldiers began coming forward, confirming they had participated in similar operations. The French government's initial strategy of denial collapsed within 48 hours as internal documents leaked from within their own foreign ministry. A junior diplomat, conscience-stricken by what he had witnessed, released communications proving the French government had been aware of the massacres and had orchestrated the cover-up. 3 days after Traore's speech, hundreds of thousands of protesters filled the streets of Paris, Lyon, and Marseille, many carrying signs with Fatima's image. The French government, facing immense public pressure, announced the suspension of all military operations in West Africa pending investigation. A week later, the UN Security Council took the extraordinary step of suspending France's veto power until the completion of the investigation, a move made possible by France's temporary abstention from the vote amid internal political chaos. For Ibrahim Traore, the aftermath brought both triumph and danger. His delegation received credible assassination threats before they could even leave New York. 7 nations offered him immediate asylum, sensing the retribution that might come. He declined them all, insisting on returning to Burkina Faso. "If I hide now, I betray the courage of those who provided this evidence at the risk of their lives," he told reporters before departing. "Some sacrificed everything to document these crimes. I must honor their bravery by showing the same resolve." The international investigation proceeded with unprecedented transparency. Experts from 17 countries examined massacre sites, analyzed ballistics evidence, exhumed mass graves, and interviewed survivors. Their preliminary report, released 2 months later, confirmed the authenticity of Traore's evidence and documented additional atrocities beyond those he had presented. The geopolitical ramifications extended far beyond France and Burkina Faso. The concept of military assistance in Africa underwent intense global scrutiny. Other former colonial powers found their own operations subjected to new levels of examination. African nations began terminating or fundamentally renegotiating security agreements that had stood for decades. Most significantly, resource contracts across the continent entered a phase of radical revision. The connection between military presence and resource extraction, laid bare by Traore's evidence, created a new standard for economic relationships. African governments, emboldened by international support, demanded terms that would have been unthinkable months earlier, and often received them, as corporations faced unprecedented public accountability. 6 months after the UN speech, a special international tribunal was established to try those responsible for the massacres. 17 French military officers and officials were indicted. The French government, now under new leadership following the collapse of the previous administration, agreed to pay reparations to victims' families and fund reconstruction of affected communities. For Fatima Ouedraogo, justice came too late. But for her village and countless others across Africa, a new era had begun, one where even the most powerful nations could be held accountable for their actions on African soil. 1 year after his historic speech, Ibrahim Traore returned to the UN General Assembly. The hall, once again filled with the world's diplomats, fell silent as he approached the podium. No side conversations continued. No phones were checked. Every eye focused on the man who had transformed international accountability in 14 minutes of undeniable truth. He carried no vial of blood this time. No dramatic footage accompanied his words. Instead, he spoke quietly about the difficult work of building true sovereignty, of creating nations where resources serve the people, where security means protection for all citizens, and where international relationships are based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. A year ago, I showed you horror, he concluded. Today, I invite you to help build something better from the ashes of that revelation. Not through speeches or resolutions, but through fundamentally reimagining how nations interact with one another. In diplomatic archives, Traore's 2 UN speeches would be studied as bookends of a pivotal moment in international relations, when a small nation broke the unwritten rules of diplomatic engagement and forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths through raw evidence rather than careful rhetoric. In Barcelona village, a memorial now stands where Fatima Ouedraogo fell. The simple stone marker bears only her name, her age, and a single phrase that has become a rallying cry for sovereignty movements worldwide. The truth needs no permission to be spoken. The small vial of blood that Traore displayed at the UN was eventually interred beneath this memorial, a symbol of how one child's tragedy, presented with unflinching courage on the world stage, helped reshape the relationship between Africa and the powers that had dominated it for centuries. As for the 14 minutes of footage that changed history, they are now required viewing in diplomatic academies worldwide, a stark reminder that in the digital age, atrocities can no longer hide behind denial, distance, or diplomatic niceties. In the end, Ibrahim Traore's legacy would not be measured in speeches or even in the justice secured for massacre victims, but in the fundamental shift he catalyzed. A world where evidence could triumph over power, where truth could pierce the veil of diplomatic pretense, and where the blood of the innocent, finally, belatedly, could speak louder than the interests of the powerful. What do you think about this story? Could a single speech with undeniable evidence really change international relations? Would you support such dramatic tactics to expose hidden atrocities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to see more powerful stories about African leadership and sovereignty. Let us know in the comments what other global confrontations you'd like to learn about.